Hello and welcome to Panzer painting. Today we have a T-34 85 with the iconic white invasion stripes ready to invade the fatherland. Here you got a chart of the different paints and materials I have used for this project. We start by priming our tank with a dark grey color. You can also use a black or a grey, but the dark color will help us hide the dark spots we might forget later on. When the dark surface priming is dry, we can add some pre-highlights with a white. This way we will try to push the contrast a bit more in the later stages. First we have to apply the green base color. The Russians had many kinds of green, but the 4BO is the most used one. Aim for the lower parts and darker parts of the tank, and don't worry if you overspray a bit. Now that the base coat is done, we can start our color modulation. This time I will try mixing my own colors, so it's a bit of a trial and error. We start with a 5:1 ratio of green and yellow. Cover all the parts you didn't paint in the previous step. The next highlight is going to be our middle ground of sorts. Mix it 3:3 and paint the upper and most exposed areas. For the third highlight we will push it a bit more with a mixing of 1:5. Just like the last step, we will aim for the upper and most exposed parts, just less than the previous steps. The last highlight is our shine. I haven't tried this before, and as far as I know, it's an extreme highlight that is supposed to direct attention to certain areas of the model. But I will let you be the judge whether I succeeded this or not. Now that we have finished our color modulation, we can continue with the next step. We must coat our tank with a Glossy Varnish. When this is dry, it will prevent silvering from decals and help us pin washing. It will also protect our paint job when we will start use the worn effect medium. Before we paint the white stripes, we need to place our decals. Let the decals soak in some warm water for a few minutes, then leave them on a piece of paper in order to get rid of the water. Apply some decal set to the wanted surface, then add the decals and wipe off any excess decal set. Then you can apply Decal Fix. When the decals are set and ready, we can start painting the white stripes. For this I use a white acrylic paint, and the paint job doesn't need to be perfect, as I imagine the Russian crew might have been in a bit of a hurry. There are also pictures of turrets with a white painted cross atop it. You can paint it however you like. Now that the white paint is dry, we can start to scratch the paint with some water. Just rub the paint with a wet brush and eventually the paint will come off. You can also use a needle if you want long scratches. We can now pin wash our tank. I usually thin my enamel wash with thinner, but this time I applied some thinner to the tank. Damp a flat brush with thinner, then apply it, and next you can apply the wash. This should let the wash flow around much easier. Work in sections, otherwise the thinner will evaporate. After about half an hour, the enamel wash is dry enough for us to remove the excess. You can use an old brush or a cotton bud for this job. Just dip it in some enamel thinner and wipe off most of the thinner in a piece of paper. Then you can clean the tank, and you can use an old brush in places you can't reach with the cotton bud. But be careful, cause you might ruin the paint job if you rub too hard. We can now add some edge highlights. This is rather simple, just use a flat brush and then dry brush it all over the edges. You can also use a pointy brush to get all the bolts and smaller areas. Next we have to add wear and tear. Russian tanks were primed green from the factory, but we wanted to pop a bit more, so we have to use a very light color to work as lighter scratches and then a dark color for the deeper ones. For this we'll use a piece of sponge and a brush. First we'll use the light color, simply dab the sponge in the paint, then remove most of the paint by dabbing it onto a piece of paper, then dab it on the areas that would see the most wear and tear from daily use and such. Use a fine brush and the dark color to add some variation to the scratches, but keep it minimal. Finally, you can use a fine brush again to make the lines across the hull and turret. Now we can start painting the tracks, the hull MG and the cables by using a dark grey. We will use a lighter grey for the highlights of the different track links, the surface of the MG, as well as the cables along the hull. Other than that, unfortunately the T-34 doesn't have any other equipment to paint. Next step is withering. Last episode I used oils, so if you want to check that out, look for my Elephant Tank Destroyer video. This time I'm going to use enamel washes. I'm going to use 3 different colors: crime, rain marks and rust. Apply the crime streaking first and then let it dry for about half an hour. Then you can blend it with an old brush and some enamel thinner. When it's dry, we can add the rain marks, do the same step as before, and then the last step would be to add a bit of rust to our tank. Now we can mess up our tank. I'm aiming for a dirty but dry look. This tank has been driving many miles across the open fields of Poland, perhaps Ukraine, in order to get to the fatherland. This time I'm going to use 2 different pigment colors. Mix them with some thinner till it becomes a wet paste, then add them starting with the darkest one, let it dry and then add the lightest one. When it's dry, I use the same mix, load an old brush and then flick it off onto the tank with a toothpick. When it dries, use some enamel thinner and a brush to blend some of the pigments. A tank would also accumulate a lot of dust from all the driving, so deposit it where you think it would accumulate over time and then blend it with an old brush. When you're happy with how it looks, you can use some Pigment Fixer or alternatively some thinner in order to fix it to the tank. For the final touch, we will add some fuel stains and some engine oil. Just add it near the fuel caps or where oil might be leaking, such as mechanical parts. Let it dry and then you can add some more if you like. Alternatively, you can also thin it so you can get a softer appearance. Last step is very important. This is where we protect our paint job. For this I'm using ultra matte varnish from AK Interactive, cause it really goes 100% matte. But give it a few thin coats, cause if it pools anywhere, you'll get some really nasty cray spots. So here we got the T-34-85 ready to invade the fatherland. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Panzer painting and that you can use it as inspiration for how to paint your own T-34 or any other Russian tank for that matter. As always, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of this in the future. I'll see you again next time.